Microphone on. Oh, there. Okay. Comparative, welcome to the American University of Armenia. The AUA and the College of Humanities and Social Sciences welcomes you to the opening of a two-day public colloquium on genocide and literature with our colleagues from Israel. It's good to say that conscience should take precedence over everything else, but political expediency and trade concerns hinder movement on the global recognition of the Armenian genocide and subsume the topic within a larger universalized discussion on humanitarian tragedies. It is the role of writers of fiction and nonfiction, journalists, bloggers, as well as other communicators to tell those stories. Yet how should the stories be told? As per our tradition, first came the word. Statements are inscribed in the book. And when the narratives are recounted to the following generations, they are accorded the status and the sanctity of truth. But when objectivity slips into subjectivity and discourse becomes destabilized, facts fade away, revisionism rules, and the word is weakened. During this colloquium, we'll hear from those whose words are being inscribed on the pages or computer screens, and learn the discursive strategies that they use to narrate the stories of yesterday, for today, and for tomorrow. So I welcome you to this colloquium. Hope you enjoy it and look forward to the presentations this evening and to tomorrow. I'm Provost Randall Rhodes. Glad you're here and welcome. Thank you very much. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Thomas Samuelin, who is the Dean of the College of Social Sciences and Humanities, who will introduce the panelists. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We're very, very pleased to have our delegation from Israel here to join us for this colloquium. And now I will do a few opening remarks and then introduce Professor Yair Aron, who is the moving force behind all this from AUA. So first, as you probably all know, AUA is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. And during this quarter century, there were many firsts. Today is another first for AUA. We welcome a group of distinguished guests from Israel, writers, scholars, journalists, to join a group of distinguished Armenian writers, scholars, and researchers to explore the topic of genocide in literature from Israeli and Armenian comparative perspectives. This, however, is not completely new ground in Armenian studies or for Armenian genocide scholars. Nearly a quarter century ago, Professor Rubina Perumian, I brought her book, published her seminal work on this topic, Literary Responses to Catastrophe, a comparison of Armenian and Jewish experience. This was followed by a series of insightful studies, including the Armenian genocide in literature, perceptions of those who lived through years of calamity, and Armenian genocide in literature, second-generation responses. Similarly, this topic has been explored by historians, sociologists, and ethnographers, including our guest this evening, Dr. Harutun Marutian of the Armenian National Academy of Sciences, and his colleague of the Armenian National Academy of Sciences, academician Richard Hovhannisyan, also from UCLA. Among Professor Hovhannisyan's many works dedicated to various aspects of the Armenian genocide, there are several specifically addressing the topic of this colloquium, including the Armenian genocide cultural and ethical legacies, and Enlightenment and Diaspora, Armenian and Jewish Cases, edited jointly by Professor Hovhannisyan and Professor Myers. There were also earlier works, Leo Hamalyan's as others see us, and there's a significant body of work, of course, on Franz Werfel's 40 Days of Musadagh, and its message for European Jews, including the work of our own visiting professor, Yair Aron. So we find ourselves in territory explored by great minds and great scholars. It is a broad and complex field of comparative research with much yet to be discovered and explored. Next week, AUA's digital library will launch a new collection comprising the works of authors who perished in the genocide, making this extensive body of literature available for the first time in a single format, searchable and readable and comparable, I should say, and opening a new field of research for scholars in this field. As for this colloquium, perhaps its distinctive feature is the focus on literature of two homelands restored to independence in the 20th century. There is now no doubt much in common and much that distinguishes the experiences and landscapes of the literary imagination of these two countries and peoples. Both have modern literary traditions that emerged in the 19th century, building on centuries of ancient, medieval, classical, religious, and secular literary work, and sharing literary roots in the Bible. Both modern states were born in the wake of genocide and were the haven of orphaned and traumatized masses, formed in the crucible of life or death battles. Both continue to struggle for peace and security. Yet there are important differences as well. Unlike Israel, Armenia is surrounded by the unrepentant perpetrators of the Armenian genocide, who have not atoned for their barbarity. It is as recent as yesterday's news. The immediacy of Artsakh puts genocide in a different light and puts Armenian writers and readers in a different frame of mind. Also, unlike Israel, Armenia recognizes the Jewish Holocaust along with other genocides and sees it as its duty to bear witness and condemn all crimes against humanity in order to uphold the norms of civilization and the community of nations. This asymmetry, too, has its reflection in literary works. Like Israel, Armenia regained independence after surviving genocide. But unlike Israelis who gained a homeland, Armenians lost a large part of their indigenous homeland. The loss of Western Armenia deprived Armenians of the habitat in which they created their lives, language, and culture since time immemorial. This loss is another asymmetry that has its reflection in literary works. This loss also makes the liberation of Artsakh yet more poignant and central to Armenian sensibilities. Armenian authors, right after the genocide, wrote about this, actually even before the genocide. Oshagan, that is Hagop Oshagan, in his panorama of Armenian literature, writes of national delirium that possessed the perpetrators. And Zabel Yesayan, in her treatment of the 1909 Adana massacres amid the ruins, underscores that the atrocities could not have happened without the uncontrollable Turkish mob. Stephen Ihrig, in his recent book on Ataturk and the Nazi imagination, refers to novels justifying the extermination of the Native Americans as one ingredient in shaping the Nazi worldview, along with newspaper accounts lionizing Ataturk. What is it that acted upon their psyches? How do we understand the perpetrator's mind? Is it a form of neurolinguistic programming, the mesmerizing of a society by demagoguery? Who induces this delirium? Lest we think it is a thing of the past, we need only listen to the anti-Armenian rants from Baku, administered in large doses on a regular basis in recent years. How and why are societies prone to be seized by such epidemics of genocidal delirium? Where does this viral, narrative-induced condition come from? Why is it so contagious? Is there a vaccine? Is there a therapy? Is there an antidote? A cure? Here, the work of Israeli scholar Eli Richter on the epidemiology of genocide may be helpful. We know from literature, scientific and creative, that some individuals or groups seem to be immune, while others seem to resist and recover, though through congenital or acquired immunity. These are mysteries, or perhaps it may be fairer to say divine grace, because, Scientific evidence is mounting that but for the grace of God, there go we all. Modern anthropology and archaeology is uncovering signs that from the very start of our species, Homo sapiens, after interbreeding with the Neanderthals and other hominids, eliminated them through genocide. The brain's hardware, this species' hardware, appears to have a tendency to run uncontrolled. It is the dark side of our humanity. Without cultural software to control it, we can and do destroy others and ourselves, self-righteously at that. The stories we tell and how we tell them program us. They are double-edged swords, and sometimes only external legal and physical restraint and outside intervention can save us from inflicting harm. To return to the literary idiom, we have the archetypical characters. On the one hand, the empathetic, altruistic avengers and selfless rescuers who intervene to save strangers in mortal distress at all costs, as if on a sacred mission against the forces of darkness. On the other hand, the pathological, predatory, preemptive terrorizers, cloaked in self-righteousness, who demonize innocent, unprovoked strangers as subhumans to be eliminated at all costs. Could it be that these archetypes are actually flip sides of the same feature of human design? So it seems literature is part of the software that may turn us into monsters and goad us to self-destruction, or elevate us to transcendence and save us from ourselves. Either way, it seems we should act soon so that the next species to dominate this planet is not compelled to rename our species, which we immodestly call Homo sapiens, something less flattering. Seen in this light, literature takes on special urgency. We have a choice about the stories we tell ourselves and how we react to them. In a world seemingly spinning out of control, this colloquium could not be more timely. We wish everyone fruitful deliberations. I'd now like to invite Professor Aharon to say a few words. Professor Aharon is an Israeli historian, scholar, and researcher in the field of Holocaust and genocide studies, racism, diasporan studies, and contemporary Jewish life. Since 2005, he has served as the head of the Department of Sociology, Political Science, and Communications at the Open University of Israel. Most recently, he has been named to establish the Genocide Studies program at the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya, one of Israel's most prestigious research universities. Professor Aharon is the author of numerous books on the Holocaust, Armenian genocide, and comparative genocides. From 1974 to 76, he was the director of the education department at Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial in Jerusalem. He has also been researcher at Hebrew University and the University of Tel Aviv. He serves on the academic boards of the Institute on Holocaust and Genocide in Jerusalem, as well as the Zorian Institute and the Genocide Education Project at San Francisco. Professor Aharon is visiting professor at AUA for the past 2 years, contributing to the university's intellectual life and the establishment of the Genocide Studies and Human Rights minor program at AUA. Professor Aharon, as I've already mentioned, was central to organizing the present colloquium. It is my pleasure to invite him to say a few words at this time.
Thank you, Tom. I discover new information about myself. I just want, what it is? Yeah, I want to say something. I thank very much the American University and Beersheba University for organizing this event. I think this is a real event. For the first time, I think academics from both countries are dealing together with so important issue for both of us. And it was mentioned, it will be mentioned tomorrow. I want to say something about the actual situation. I'm Israeli. I see you are here with, thank you, it's moved me, thank you for thanking me. I just do what I think I have to do. I want to tell you, we are not myself, our friends and colleagues, we are shameful about the attitude of my country to you Armenians. We have to be the first with you. You heard me saying it many times. but we are going worse and worse in our attitude to the Armenian genocide. We do not recognize the Armenian genocide. We deny the Armenian genocide practically. There is a history now we celebrate the so-called genocide in Khujalu, so shamefully. And we are selling weapons to Azerbaijan. I wrote 2 years ago an article. I said the weapon will be used to try to destroy Nagorno-Karabakh, not to where Iran, with some stupid tried to tell me. It was clear. Last week we have seen it. But we are shameful. We condemn the Israeli attitude. I believe that in the future, Israel, not the government, but the Knesset, maybe will recognize the Armenian genocide. But I'm so sorry. We are trying to struggle, but we have to see in face the reality. Israel, unfortunately, will continue to send weapons to Azerbaijan to where Nagorno-Karabakh. We have to do whatever we can to do. But if we want to be realistic, we have to admit it. They will continue. They are going to send a new weapon in the near future. We can change it, but we must to struggle against it. I don't ask you to forgive us, because it's not forgivable. But just know that there are many Israelis that are with you. And the nasty, ugly attitude of the government does not represent the civil society. I'm sure for it. I know, and it's not easy to me to say, our behavior is we are betraying the memory of our genocide and our victims. And we have not the right to do it. But unfortunately, our government do it again and again. But they have to know that there are Israelis who will struggle against this attitude. And we will struggle. I repeat, I don't believe that Israel will stop because of me or my colleagues stop sending weapons to Azerbaijan. We have to face it. But I believe that the Israeli parliament in the future, not the government, will find a way to recognize the Armenian genocide. Thank you.
Thank you, Yair. And now I would like to introduce our next speaker. Dr. Harutun Marutyan is the lead researcher at the Department of Contemporary Anthropological Studies at the Institute of Archaeology and Ethnography of the National Academy of Sciences of Armenia. He is an IREX RSEP Michigan University Scholar, Fulbright Scholar, and DAAD alumnus, and a Diane and Howard Wall Fellow at the Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies at the U.S. Memorial Museum in Washington. He received the President of Armenia, of the Republic of Armenia's award for his significant contributions to Armenian genocide recognition and the relationship between the Armenian genocide and the Karabakh movement. I now invite Dr. Marutyan to make his presentation.
Thank you for the invitation. So, I titled my presentation on structural peculiarities of Armenian genocide and Jewish Holocaust memory. I am going to show slides just with texts only. When the necessity arises to compare the people living in the region of Caucasus, the Armenians compare themselves with Georgians, and vice versa, mainly on the basis of the religious factor, and the Azerbaijanis with the Turks, based on the religious, linguistic, and historic factors. However, when there are discussions on a broader sense, the Armenians very often compare themselves with the Jews on the basis of the similar historical fate, the Georgians with the Basque people on the basis of the theory of common ethnogenesis, and the Azerbaijanis again with the Turks and other Turkic people. That is to say, for the three nations which are living in the same region, there are totally different principles in the case of comparing themselves with the outer world. The Armenians comparing themselves with the Jews at first take into consideration one of the most important and pivotal elements of the identity of the two people, the fact of genocide Holocaust, which they both suffered in the 20th century, and the memory about this event. Then the loss of historical homeland in the past and the fact of living and existing under foreign powers for centuries. They are often perceived as two peoples with similar historical fates. These circumstances allows me to view them as neighbors in memory. It is generally accepted that literature is reflecting the reality. The reality is multifaceted. People's mode of thinking and mode of action are different too. That is why the literature is also different. I mean, diverse issues are discussed through works of different genres. Sometimes questions raised and discussed in literature may become the way, the means, which can bring to changes in the real life. That is, the writers are very often those people who see the sprouts of some phenomena in the real life, and they discuss them in their works and help them to grow and become trees. In the Armenian and Jewish literature, especially during last 100 and 120 years, the theme of genocide has its specific place. I am not an expert in literature, and my estimations on the theme of the theme can be non-professional. However, I am social culture anthropologist. I do research in the field of memory, in particular have professional interests and publications on questions related to Armenian genocide and Jewish Holocaust memory comparisons, and maybe that is why I am invited to this colloquium. Therefore, it is better for me to speak on the themes which are familiar to me. In 10-11 days, the Armenian people and its friends will commemorate the memory of Armenian victims, the memory of Armenian genocide victims, 101 or 100 plus 1 anniversary. In Armenia, the Day of Genocide commemoration, April 24, is celebrated more than half a century. This commemoration had its developments, but this day, as a rule, is perceived as commemoration day of a trauma. And tomorrow we are going to listen at least two presentations on the trauma, Dr. Khachik Gasparyan and Dr. Ashot Voskanyan. The theme of traumatic reality of the past was prevailing in the Armenian literature maybe up to the 1980s. In case of these discussions, the main stress was on the loss of the human lives, culture, motherland, etc. At the same time, let us not forget that hundreds of thousands of people who suffered trauma, who preferred not to discuss this question with their children, keeping their traumatic feelings in themselves, during decades overcame the genocide, overcame the trauma, and created a strong, powerful diaspora. Most of the survivors became specific demiurges, who, in order to keep the memory of their lost families and clans, also were composing large families with many children and giving them the names of dead relatives. Moreover, they themselves were becoming patriarchs of newly created clans, and in that way they were overcoming the trauma. Yes, for decades the trauma was accompanying the genocide survivors, in some cases also their descendants, but maybe that trauma was instigating them to have victories in everyday life and business. That is, the trauma had also creative potential. The traumatic memory, being mostly typical to the genocide survivors, becomes a part of memory culture for their generations. Therefore, in my opinion, the use of the term trauma for description of nowadays reality is not true. Let me repeat once again that it has mostly become a part of collective memory, a part of memory culture. Moreover, it has certain developments, transformations. Thus, during the years of the Karabakh movement or Armenian Revolution, 1988-1990, in Armenia, to my belief, Armenian people greatly overcame the trauma of the genocide. Moreover, the memory of the genocide, which was awakened immediately following the events in Sumgait, was put into forefront, drove people to activity, and became the engine that provided the opportunity for the gradual, step-by-step changes of old perceptions and stereotypes, and for the transformation of an identity based on outdated values to the formation of a new identity. In fact, it was the genocide memory that became the means for the Karabakh movement and ultimately allowed for democratic reformations. That is, the factor that is often interpreted as an obstacle to the elimination of the bondages of the past and hence a hindrance to the real progress of Armenians and a retrograde means, became the major incentive in Armenia's reality and finally led to independence. Since 1965, every year on April 24, in Armenia, people commemorate the memory of genocide victims. According to official formulation, the memory day is dedicated only to the victims. In Armenia, the term victim means only the 1.5 million victims killed, dead, slaughtered, massacred, etc. of Turkish Yataghan. Meanwhile, during the years of genocide, the Armenian population in Shatakh, Tagh, Van, Shabin Garahisar, Mush, Fantachak, Urfa, Hajan, and Ayantab was forced to take up arms. Self-defensive battles were waged in not only cities and comparatively large settlements, but as well as provinces, namely Gavash, Pesandasht, Sasun, Musadagh, Inkhanus, and Khotorjur. The self-defense was lasted for days, weeks, even months. In a lot of cases, families fought deadly battles against the enemy, even if these battles only lasted for a couple of hours. Many people were saved, many were killed. One thing is certain. In many instances, Armenian civilians were not sheep to be slaughtered without a fight. An Armenian earnestly defended himself and his family, their lives and dignity. In the meantime, the Armenian world has commemorated the Armenian genocide victims for over a century, either officially or informally. Participants of the famous and still unknown defensive battles are thus referred to as victims. Over decades, this very interpretation has evoked manifestations of an inferiority complex, a view of the genocide memories as a burden, and frequently a belief that it is crucial to sweep these memories away. Today we have to deal with the fourth generation of the genocide survivors, among whom there are quite a lot of young people who does not want to feel themselves as the descendants of the just victims because of the official stressing only the traumatic character of the genocide. This is a theme which can be interesting also for writers. That is, what to do, how to help them, how to make possible the conformity of the phenomena with the contemporary realities. In the case of Jews, instances of armed resistance in the years of Holocaust had been relatively fewer, or to be more accurate, different by nature. Participation in the underground and thus in the resistance, in the guerrilla movement, resistance in concentration camps, etc. Yet the Holocaust historians consistently pay much attention to this theme, and in particular to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, April-May 1943. Note that the fact that the Holocaust Commemoration Day Day in Israel is officially called Holocaust and Heroism Remembrance Day, or Holocaust Martyrs and Heroes Remembrance Day. The museum Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Martyrs and Heroes Remembrance Authority, has been conditioned, among other factors, by this as well. I would like to mention in this regard that whereas the memory of the Armenian genocide victims is observed on the day of the mass arrests of the Armenian intelligentsia in Constantinople and the beginning of deportation, Holocaust Commemoration Day, after long debate, was chosen to be remembered on the 27th of the Jewish month of Nisan. In 1953, the Jewish parliament chose that day because it is at midpoint between the beginning of the revolt of the Jewish ghetto of Warsaw against the fascists and the day of the independence of Israel. One way or other, Holocaust Remembrance Day, as distinct from the Armenia's case, relates to a considerable extent to the idea of struggle and fight. Reflecting again on the Jewish experience, let me note that that the Yad Vashem Memorial itself was founded through an Act of Parliament in 1953, and the duties of the National Memorial are clearly defined in the founding law. The 9 articles clarify who is to be remembered: the victims, the families, the communities, the heroes, Jewish soldiers, partisans, their helpers, and those who tried to maintain their dignity. Of the 9 articles, 6 address to resistance. That is a clear statement. The consideration of resistance is one of the main tasks of Yad Vashem. In the Armenian case, such steps were not taken. 100 years passed. We have the reality of self-defense battles during the years of genocide. We have 25 years of national statehood. We have the Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh victories. Therefore, it is crucial to review and redefine the meaning of Remembrance Day, or at least to shift the emphasis and rephrase the commonly accepted wording into Armenian genocide victims and heroic defense participants Remembrance Day. Another question. For several decades, now in discussions on the Holocaust, Jewish and American scholars, at least in the USA and the European countries, have emphasized that the guilt is neither with the Germans as a nation, nor with the peoples of Germany's allied countries in World War II, but with the SS, Nazism, fascism, racism, and other equivalent ideologies. In other words, they do not give an ethnic qualification to the conflict that took place in the past, but view it as the result of a criminal ideology. Even if some researchers try to put a share of guilt on ethnic Germans or any other of the common people, a most vivid example is Daniel Goldhagen's publication of 1996 in New York, Hitler's Willing Executioners, Ordinary Germans and the Holocaust. Notable negative responses ensue in both historiographical, including that of the great majority of Jewish authors, and related circles. For nearly a century, Armenian historians have emphasized the ethnicity of the perpetrators of the genocide, mostly Turks and Kurds. Of course, the ideology of the Young Turks has been voiced and written about, and yet the emphasis, in my opinion, in the special and fiction literature, in the everyday talks, has mostly been on the ethnicity of the genocide perpetrators. Such an emphasis may also be conditioned by the level of relations with the side of perpetrators and their legal successors. In the case of the Armenians, the responsibility for the present state of affairs lies first and foremost with the Turkish policy of denial. In turn, this policy has led to centuries-old persistence of the stereotype of eternal friends and eternal enemies. This policy has also been responsible for the stereotype's duration and its active role in contemporary political and civil life of Armenia. As a consequence, for as long as the Armenian genocide remains unrecognized by the legal successors of the state that committed it, and for as long as the phenomenon of the genocide is not transferred from its current ethnic dimension to that of an ideology, Armenians will have eternal enemies, which will automatically make room for the presence of an eternal friends. And you know the behavior of our eternal friends just a week ago, what we have seen. For all these reasons, the issues of the Young Turk ultra-nationalist and racist ideology has not yet received the same level of attention as in international scholarship. In my opinion, this is one of the reasons that the Armenian genocide did not become a part of the international memory. Why? If short, here is an explanation. Although the issue of comparison between the Young Turk and Nazi ideologies and their interaction with both world wars have been devoted growing scholarly attention, their similarities were not yet firmly embedded neither in the Republic of Armenia scholarship nor in the consciousness of ordinary people. It is our belief that these factors hinder the Armenians' dialogue with the world, lessen to some extent the interest in the Armenian genocide, diminish the political scope of its spreading, and prevent its perception as part of a global calamity caused by inhuman ideology having led, like the Jewish Holocaust, to the destruction of millions of people. Well, which are some of the tools and means which may help Armenians to make the most important part of their identity known to the world? Here too we have to apply to the Jewish experience. Let me clarify. In 2013, the total number of museums plus exhibitions, temporary and permanent, devoted to the Jewish Holocaust totaled 67 throughout the world. By contrast, in the case of the Armenian genocide, that number was barely 4 to 5. Meanwhile, in Armenia and in more than 40 countries of the world, there are more than 300 monuments to the memory of victims of the genocide, and most of them are khachkars, cross stones. The question has no simple answer. There are several reasons of this phenomena, which I discussed in an already published article. That is why I will try to be brief here. In the diaspora, these monuments, which served for annual commemorations of the genocide martyrs on April 24, were, in my opinion, built more to the purpose of the diasporan communities than for the public at large. The propagating scope of a monument is usually comparatively low for the people of the given country. Information about the Armenian genocide may be conveyed either by inscriptions on monuments or personal contacts with Armenians, the books, the press, and the Internet. In comparison, the propagation scope of a museum is considerably higher than that of a monument. For example, the information contained in a museum exhibition is much more coordinated, persistent, and is also presented in different languages. It is not just a purposeful and scientifically grounded exhibition of classified, commented, technically and artistically designed museum objects. A museum exhibition offers a much broader opportunity for not just maintaining, but for disseminating a genocide memory beyond ethnic bounds, and thus for introducing it into the value system of other nations and states, into other identities even. It is by means of museum exhibitions and their scientific, educational, cultural, and propagating activities that opportunities are created for the demonstration of certain political attitudes and national issues to thousands of visitors. Though it may seem paradoxical, the launching of a campaign to found a museum actually may increase the level of activity and organization of a given community. I am sure that the creation of museum exhibitions with the research units in their structure, publication of fictional literature are one of the ways which may allow to create possibilities for the inclusion of the Armenian genocide memory in the frames of American, European, and or Russian memory. This is a long process and requires decades of consecutive work. In the fictional literature, the events of Holocaust and genocide, as a rule, are presented through depiction of fates of individuals. The reader often learned about the phenomena of a larger scale in this way. When the problem is discussed by the researcher, it is becoming obvious that there are many subjective perceptions, and it is not so easy to carry out from them the scientific objective one. In other words, it is very important to find those sieves which may allow to distinguish the subjective knowledge from the objective one. I would like here to concretize upon one last phenomena and to use as a sieve the Jewish experience. Several years ago, the concept of just memory and shared pain was put forward by the then Minister of Foreign Affairs of Turkey, Ahmet Davutoglu, now the Prime Minister, which actually places perpetrators and victims on the same level. This ideology mildly implies that Turks or Muslim citizens of Ottoman Empire involved in the Armenian genocide in general also rescued Armenians. Therefore, merely accentuation should be altered to point out the good and the positive along with criticism. However, this approach often emphasizes only the phenomenon of rescuing Armenians by Turks and its propaganda value. In this case, it is of crucial importance to define what we mean by rescue and what the term does entail with the context of the Armenian genocide. It should be noted that, as with many terms, there is a great amount of definitional variation, and various individuals understand the term rescue differently. Thus, a rescue may variously refer to informing about the impending massacre, not killing, killing some but sparing others, escaping death by being forcibly converted to Islam or converted under threat of death, staying alive but being subjected to sexual harassment and exploitation, getting married to the murderer of your family or his offspring and having children, serving as perpetrators at perpetrator's home and making ends meet, working in perpetrator's farm for months and years, providing economic benefit for him, giving the child as a gift to aliens while facing imminent death, etc. Interestingly, some of these interpretations existed in narratives recorded from survivors and are even encountered in our days. Thus, qualifying the phenomenon of rescue is a problem indeed. So which are the criteria that enable us to determine true rescue from a false one? One needs not to look far for the answers, as the issue is already indirectly touched upon in the text of the 1948 Genocide Convention. Anyway, there is a need for additional clarifications, because not all answers can be found in this document. It would be helpful to look at the Jewish experience in attempting to deal with the issue. One of the most important institutions in charge of preserving the memory of the victims of the Holocaust, as I told earlier, is the Yad Vashem. Apart from this task, one of the principal duties of the museum is to convey the gratitude of the State of Israel and the Jewish people to non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. According to Yad Vashem official site, I am quoting, this means establishing Yad embarked upon a worldwide project to grant the title of righteous among the nations to the few who helped Jews in the darkest time in their history. The basic conditions for granting the title are: 1. First, active involvement of the rescuer in saving one of or several Jews from the threat of death or deportation to death camps. Second, the risk of to the rescuer's life, liberty or position. Third, the initial motivation being the intention to help persecuted Jews. It is not for payment or any other reward, such as religious conversion of the saved person, adoption of a child, etc. Fourth, the existence of testimony of those who were helped, or at least equivocal documentation establishing the nature of the rescue and its circumstances. The above mentioned brings us to the question: are all rescuers of Jews entitled to receive the title of righteous among the nations? The answer is no, not all of them. Rescue of Jews took many forms and required varying degrees of involvement and self-sacrifice. The title of the righteous is reserved for the smaller group of those who actively risked their lives or their liberty for the for the express purpose of saving Jews from the persecution and murder. There is a wider circle of men and women who assisted the persecuted in the darkest hour of Jewish history, but whose help did not involve the taking of risks. Nevertheless, even though their aid was crucial to the Jews' survival, in the absence of risk, they do not qualify for recognition within the framework of the righteous program. Furthermore, the title is not attributed if the motivation is other than the rescue of persecuted Jews. Such other motivations can be, first, financial gain, second, the wish to religiously convert the rescued person, or the protection of converted Jews because they are viewed as Christians and the rescuers feel that they should not be treated as Jews. Third, the wish to take Jewish child for the purpose of adoption, and fourth, the rescue as a result of resistance, actively that was not aimed at saving Jews. Yet another reason for not attributing the title may be that while saving one or several Jews, the very same rescuer was involved in murder, war crimes, or causing harm to others. Up to this point, everything seems to be more or less clear regarding the granting of the titles. As there is a distinct methodology that has been in operation for more than half a century, it is possible to filter stories connected to the rescue of the members of the Jewish community during the Holocaust, like a sieve, using a set of criteria to distinguish genuine cases of rescue from tall tales or fabrications. Since the establishment of the title, more than 25,000 individuals have been honored for their efforts. It is a system that has been acknowledged by many Jews and non-Jews alike. The features and the criteria it contains are universal and acceptable, in my opinion, not only for the events which took part 50 or 100 years ago, but also for the humanity in general. If these provisions are effective for the Jewish community, it is safe to assume that they, perhaps with certain modifications to fit the Armenian experience better, could also work in the case of the Armenian genocide victims as rescuers. Let us not forget the fact that the persecution of the Jewish community and their subsequent destruction in Germany and the wider Europe began only a decade or so after the end of the Armenian genocide, 1915-1923, sharing with the latter many common ideological motives, economic motivations, and mechanisms of destruction. The Armenian genocide survivor testimonies are several thousand. Part of them are already published, another part are looking for their turn in the National and Family Archives. It is very hard for the researcher, both physically and psychologically, to read them all. That is why, while doing research on the issue, I have chosen those testimonies which were documented in 1916-1917 among 600 Armenian refugee survivors. That were recorded immediately after the large-scale massacres and deportations of 1915, and provide many events which, in due course of time, were deprived of their importance and sometimes seem trivial and are not properly presented in the to the fact finders. These stories in 2012 were compiled and published by the National Archive of Armenia in 3 volumes. It is important to note that stories collected in these volumes have not been selected by a strict guiding principle. The books have been compiled without any thematic guidance, being thus open to sustained and systematic analysis. The analysis of 600 stories make clear that despite the fact that many individuals survived the massacres physically, they underwent tremendous psychological trauma, not the least because these acts of rescue, so-called acts of rescue, included or were otherwise accompanied by economic and sexual exploitation, forced conversions, etc., by rescuers themselves. Without disregarding the outcome of these rescues or diminishing their significance, many lives were indeed saved. it should be pointed out that they nevertheless fall short of meeting the criteria set by the Institute of the Righteous and cannot be regarded as authentic humanitarian acts. Moreover, they are not so obvious manifestations of a genocidal logic. In other words, such individuals who may have exploited the vulnerable situation of the victims despite the final outcome of their actions may not be considered as true rescuers and therefore cannot be numbered among the righteous. It is our opinion that only approaching the question in such a manner, if we are to have a truly scientific discussion regarding the matter at all, can we distinguish it from more subjective and politically driven deliberations. Thus, the time-tested conceptual sieve proposed by the Institute of the Righteous becomes an all too important mechanism for distinguishing true acts of humanitarianism from acts that resemble them only superficially, which would then allow us to better understand the historical and social dynamics at play. During the last several years, due to the forthcoming centenary of the Armenian genocide, there were heard suggestions from officials as well as intellectuals that Armenian people, especially the young generation, needs for the creation of new identity, which will be freed from the burden of the hard past. Let us not forget that there are no people in the world who would like to relinquish, give up from the different pages of their history, especially if they are dark ones, such as the Armenian genocide. There is a need to reconceptualize, reconsider, re-examine that pages of history, using also the experience of those people who already were familiar with similar events. And in this case, a huge role can have the literature. Thank you. I think yes.
Oh, that's it. You just click on
Yes.
Thank you. Just let this go. Thank you, Dr. Marutian. And now I would like to present our next speaker. Ora Ahamir is a novelist and editor, founder and former director of the Jerusalem Institute of Israel Studies, where she served for 31 years until 2010. After a career in international diplomacy, she served as coordinator of the Prime Minister's Commission on the Status of Women in Israel. She has authored and edited many books and publications on Jerusalem and other topics in Hebrew and in English. Actively engaged in public, educational, and cultural causes, she received an honor citation from the city of Jerusalem in 2011. Her novel, Bride, received the Book Publishers Association Gold Prize in 2014. Her new Hebrew novel on the Armenian genocide is due to appear this October. I now invite Ms. Amir to make her presentation. Thank you. She'll be making it from there.
With your permission, I'll talk from here. My talk is not an academic one. It's much more personal. It's the feelings. It's a report of a writer who's tried to struggle with the difficult subject of the Armenian genocide. Around the age of 70, after a long career as the head of an academic institute, as you heard, I took up fiction writing. My first novel succeeded beyond my dreams, and it evoked in me a passion for writing. And finally, after the age of 70, I found my true vocation. In the past 3 years, I've been researching and writing my second novel about the Armenian genocide and the relationships between Jews in Armenia and Armenians. The book that is called Refuge or Rest, or in Hebrew, Manoach, a place where you've put down your head after struggle to rest, will be published in a few months. I was accompanied all along by Dr. George Hinckley-Yan, the historian of the Jewish quarter in Jerusalem, who guided me, taught me, met with me, made me read over 40 books and studies about the Armenian genocide, and in many ways he is the godfather of the book. Why did I write it? Some 6 reasons. First of all, Jerusalem. Jerusalem is where I was born and raised, and it was a topic of my institute's studies. I wrote about Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem, it is the Armenian quarter that fascinated me for many years. First of all, it's very mysterious and beautiful. It is a wall within the old city of Jerusalem. It is built as a maze, one court leading to the other, another leading to the other. It is very clean and manicured, and jasmine and mint grows in tin cans along the houses. And it also houses the most ornate and beautiful church in Jerusalem, the Cathedral of St. James, and holds very ancient rituals, which are really fascinating to see, and also old and colored manuscript over 1,000 years old. But above all, it contains the Armenians. The Armenians, people with very strong features, artists, ceramic artists, photographers, and priests in long black gowns with pointed hoods. The second reason, so my fascination with the Armenian quarter was a very important reason for writing the book, and my grandson Tomer prepared a short presentation on it. If we have time, we'll show it later for those of you who have never seen the Armenian quarter of Jerusalem. The second reason is my husband's family. My husband Jacob, for him, supporting the Armenians issues is a familial affair. His father, who was an important historian and thinker, wrote as early as 1945, immediately after the Jewish Holocaust, a big article claiming that the Jewish and the Armenian faiths are very similar. He actually named part of it, Dear Zor was their Auschwitz. And he made a claim that the Jews must recognize that the Armenians had suffered a fate similar to theirs. My husband, who is an important journalist and TV personality, followed in his footsteps, and he was the first one in Israel to put a strong television piece on the Armenian genocide, in which he interviewed survivors, which he found in the Armenian quarter. This was a very bold move because a big pressure was put on him, both by the Turks, by the Turkish ambassador, and our own foreign ministry. But he persisted and showed it, and since then, each and every year on April 24th, he either publishes an article or television story demanding that Israel recognizes the Armenian Holocaust. By the way, the people who protest here protest against friends. We are the friends who are with you in your struggle. So we may carry the message, but the people here are people who identify with you and fight your struggle. My third reason was my own family. In my father's family, most of my father's family were Holocaust victims, were murdered in concentration camps, including my grandfather, my grandmother, all of my uncles and aunts. The few survivors that came to Israel, that made it to Israel after the concentration camps, had tattoos on their arms, which was given to them as marks of enslavement. And when I wrote about Armenian women with tattooed faces, I also thought about my own family. The fourth reason is Israeli literature. Israeli literature we are very proud of it, and rightly so. It is rich, it is variated, it is translated into many languages. One of our authors got a Nobel Prize for literature, and each and every year an Israeli author is among the finalists to be nominated for a Nobel Prize. But Armenian Israeli literature ignored the Armenian issue. We have many translated books who deal with it. The 40 Days of Musadag, the Book of Whispers, these are big hits in Israel. And also some 3 or 4 recently translated novels. But only in the year 1920, 2 Israeli writers wrote about the Armenian genocide, but not in modern Israeli literature. And I felt a need to fill the void. My fifth reason is women. Only in the beginning of the 21st century, and specifically after the atrocities in former Yugoslavia, crimes against women in war times were recognized as crimes against humanity, something that needs an international coordinated activity in order to be eradicated. Even with Holocaust studies, which are so well developed, dealing with women and the different suffering of women in time of Holocaust and wars was taken up only in very recent years. And here again, it was important to me to put a spotlight at this hidden or covered issue. And the final reason, the sixth reason, is Teddy Kollek. Teddy Kollek was the legendary mayor of Jerusalem for 28 years. I was very fortunate to work with him in the Jerusalem Institute, and he had a special love for the Armenians. He considered them a very important entity in the Jerusalem fabric. He often visited the Armenian quarter and made us aware of its special aesthetics. And the Armenian loved him back. To this day, they speak very fondly about him. And I felt that if Teddy, who was dear to me, was alive today, he would have been pleased with my choice to write about the Armenians. So what is the book about? The book is about small, persecuted people searching for respite or rest from their troubled histories. It is about a hidden and revealed connection between Jews and Armenians. Since, unlike history, a novel is not about people, it's about personalities, it's about heroes. The book deals with characters, with individuals seeking self-fulfillment, soaring towards success, crashing, and then looking for comfort. My story begins 100 years ago in Aleppo, where a wealthy Jewish family rescues an Armenian girl. Her name is Shushan. She has a tattooed face. They have connections, business connections and friendship connections with her family, who comes from Sivas. The Jewish family is ruled by a magnificent matriarch. Her name is Luna. And in quiet hours of embroidery, Shushan is telling the story of her terrible years in the deportation marches, and Luna, the matriarch, takes note of what Shushan tells her. In about 1923 or 22, the Jewish family moves to Jerusalem from Aleppo, takes Shushan with her. Shushan gets to live in the Armenian quarter. I don't want to go into too many details. I will not end. And 100 years later, in current-day Jerusalem, we meet a modern-day Luna, another Luna, the granddaughter of the matriarch from Aleppo. And she finds the notes of Shushan's story and makes them into a cornerstone of her work, which has to do with fight or against violence against women in times of war and genocide. Perhaps you know that this is an international move, coordinated move, to make crimes against women in war times, Rwanda, Sarajevo, whatever. And Luna gets inspiration from Shushan's story and embeds her into her works. We also meet George Solomon. George Solomon is a renowned academic from America. He has Armenian roots. His grandparents were survivors of the genocide. And he comes to Jerusalem to connect with his Armenian roots in the Armenian quarter of Jerusalem. Many things happen to these characters, and this is the book. This is what the book is about. Now, the main characters, the main obvious characters of the book are Luna, the current-day Luna, and George, the current-day Armenian. They are the obvious heroes of the book. But in truth, there are two hidden heroes that motivate and move the story, and the reader needs to discover it, that they are actually the people who perpetuate or make it happen. One of them is Shushan. Shushan is a mute protagonist. She has no voice. At times, she's totally silent during the trauma. But her words, written by Luna, the matriarch, penetrate and influence. Because her life after the genocide is a life of a submissive woman, a woman who is silenced, a woman who has faraway memories of love and family, but her real life till her death is a hard life of hard work and living an ascetic life in the Armenian quarter of Jerusalem, because there is no redemption to a body and a soul that have been so badly crushed. But sometimes words are all what remains of people. This is what we leave behind. When our body fade and we are actually destined to oblivion. but written words survive. This is how Shushan's words give life to the dead Shushan. And when current day Luna discovers them, they become a motivator of her work. The Armenian girl who was beaten, starved, raped, and sold as a slave becomes 100 years later a motivator of change in a global effort to change policies against women. Noam is the paralyzed son of Luna, and he's paralyzed from the neck down, and he is the weakest protagonist one can imagine. But he is discovered to be a man whose vitality, humanity, wisdom make him a leader in a global fight against genocide everywhere. And I haven't painted a pretty picture of his life. I described it in its most difficult terms. I described the offense of being a man who depends totally for the most intimate needs on others. I described his failures towards as a parent, as a husband. But I gave him abilities normal people don't have. For instance, I gave him an ability to see the beauty of creation in sky landscapes. He sits in his wheelchair and he sees in changing sky above him the beauty of creation. Or he can see in a single branch whole forests. And this is an ability we mobile people who seek, walk, or travel to get sublime views never will have. Now, the process of writing is always very mysterious. One cannot anticipate anything. And one goes for sources of inspiration when writing. I knew I wanted to write about the Armenian genocide for many years, but I ignored the urge. I was occupied with many other things. But one day I met a paralyzed man, paralyzed from the neck down, and his proud, strong head struck me. And when I returned home, this was Noam, and when I returned home, I wrote the first pages of the novel. And from then on, I couldn't stop. To understand him better, I later interviewed 3 or 4 paralyzed persons in order to get into their daily lives, their daily spirits, their daily struggles. As for Shushan, I was inspired to create Shushan after I read a book probably known to all of you, which appeared in the year 1919. I found the original book in the Armenian Quarter. It is called Ravished Armenia, the story of Aurora Mardigan. Today in the Genocide Museum, I could see that she is already a known hero here. But for me, it was a new story told by a woman, and she inspired me in creating Shushan. I also placed, for inspiration, I placed a big group picture of Armenians orphans who arrived in Jerusalem in the year 1918 above my computer. And each time, this is a terrible picture. Actually, in the museum, it occupies a whole wall. you see 20 barefoot children, very thin, wearing tattered clothes, wearing mostly with shaven heads. And they have terrible expressions on their faces: fear, accusing, shame, anger. And each time I sat down to write, I would look to another face and having a silent conversation with it. Who are you? Where did you come from? What happened to you? Was life in Jerusalem better after all when you came to Jerusalem? And this is how I wrote the book, with these silent dialogues with the Armenian orphans that arrived in Jerusalem in 1918. I also require music to write, and I started to look for Armenian music and soon captivated by it. My favorite one is called Armenian Spirit. This is Armenian tunes played to a duduk, and this is played all the time in the corner where I write. Now, there are many ways or many techniques of writing literature. My way of writing involves a very long process of research, because I need to know the world of my heroes, of my protagonists. So I need to know what happened in the genocide, who masterminded it, what happened to the women in the desert, what happened to the women who escaped to the towns, what was life for a Jewish family in Aleppo 100 years ago. There are a million questions to be answered, and you read and read and read and read and talk to people, and it seems endless, because the more you read and the more you learn, the more ignorant you feel, and the process becomes endless. And there is a great fear to be found ignorant of the background, and it's very frustrating, because the time and effort you put into research is almost unnoticed in the novel. This is in the background. This is the backstage upon which your characters and hero perform. You put 3 years into research, and it is hardly noticed in the novel. But it's necessary. You need to do it. I didn't have a planned plot for my novel. But when I created Luna, the woman who tells the story, the narrator, I sort of entered Luna's body or Luna's head. And it was Luna who kept opening door after door after door to let other heroes in, to let other protagonists in, and to let more stories in. And miraculously, one story joined the other, and this how the plot was formed. It's mysterious, but this is how you write literature. I also had no idea that I would end the book with an apocalyptic prophecy of the ruin of both the Jewish and the Armenian states. This is how the book ends. I was writing it during Yom Kippur, which is our day of Lent and self-searching, and I was very pessimistic about the fate of the world being so evil and being so cruel, and about also thinking about my old people always fighting and struggling, misunderstood by the rest of the world, often thought of as unjust. And this how the apocalyptic vision came to me, and I wrote it down. I'm not sure it will stay. I'll tell you why. Because, and this is a story within. One day, my grandson asks me, "Why are you so sad?" And I said, "My hero in the book just died." And he said, "But wait, you can revive him. A writer is like God. You can put him to death and you can revive him." So the same thing goes about the apocalyptic vision on the destruction of the Jewish and the Armenian states, which end my book. Okay, but I told you that already that the book is not about nations. It's about people. It's about the enigma of the relationship between individuals. How do they love each other? How do they torture each other? What scares them? What scars them? What are their inner sins? And this is what the book is about. The people, what happens to them, how they feel, how they interact with each other, they falling in love, suffering as a result of love, and more situations and stories carried out or happening to individual people. The nations are in the background. And one last remark. After I wrote my first and very successful novel, I am very much afraid to disappoint my readers. Every author is afraid of disappointing his readers. And I thought, for a long while, I thought that it is very fine to be remembered as a writer or as an author of one good book. It's fine, it's okay. But then I wrote the second book. And now, before it appears, again, I'm quite fearing what will be the reaction. And I tell myself that if my readers will love and embrace Shushan, Luna, George, who came from America, and they'll care about them, and they will want to protect them. If that happens, I'll know that I wrote a second good book, and my passion for writing will not subside. So this is my story. And if you want to see the short presentation of the Armenian Quarter, here it is. This is the entrance to the Armenian Quarter. This is the old city of Jerusalem, and to the lower left side is the Armenian Quarter. You can see it. It occupies, and this is what the quarter looks like inside. The courts leading to each other, the ancient houses. This is a mosaic found at one of the entrances to the old city, and it's Armenian, and it has an Armenian inscription, and it dates to the 5th century. This is the entrance to the St. George's Cathedral, and this is inside the St. George Cathedral. It's gorgeous. It's very, very beautiful. Some artifacts found there. There are similar things that we have seen here. Books, ancient manuscripts. This is a manuscript written in Jerusalem in the 11th century. This is where the Armenians hide their very precious and old manuscripts. You have to pass 3 iron doors and about 5 courtyards to reach it, and it hides behind it. This is what it looks inside. And here is Father Koiko Maxunian, whom I interviewed with inside the ancient manuscripts library. This is the entrance to the Patriarch's house. This is a library where I spent so much time. This is a ceremony within the Armenian quarter. This is the grave or the burial place of Saint James within the church. And I think that this is it.
Thank you. I don't know whether I can reach this. Well, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I know we're running a little late. Because we started a bit late, but if there are some questions people like to ask now, we can ask them now. And remember that all day tomorrow, our guests will be with us. We're going to have many presentations on this theme, so we'll have a chance to discuss it further then. Questions right now, please.
Hello, thank you very much. This is a remark, actually. As one of the witnesses of the protest, I would like to express what I saw. It was a silent protest, and of course, it was not directed to specific individuals. As an Armenian, we feel the pain that a nation has experienced Holocaust hasn't recognized the Armenian genocide, so it's natural. And it's shameful, of course. The second thing is that Israel sells weapons to Baku, which is again a shame, and it's natural that the students have expressed their protest. And as we know, you are an intellectual who is respected in Israel. The students wanted to express their protest, and they know that you will convey the message that the Armenian nation is very friendly, and we have friends, Jewish friends personally, I have. But when friendship is not mutual and is one-sided, it becomes abusive. So that's all that the students wanted to express. Thank you.
I say that writing is emotional, and of course, this is a horrible material. You read about unimaginable atrocities, and it wrenches your heart. It's painful whether it's Armenians or Jews or Rwandan women or Japanese women. Torturing human beings is painful, whoever they are. Of course, when it's your own family and your own people, and you grieve in a different way. But what you feel inside is the same. It's a human being who are suffering.
Yeah, Hi. I wanted to ask you a question about your process of writing. I find that when I write fiction that I struggle and I can't finish my fiction because I can't decide where to take this person that I begin to care about. And I was wondering how. Do you have any advice of how you decide as God where you're going to take your character? How did you do that with your new book?
Some of it is not planned. A lot of it is not planned. I say that I felt that my heroine is opening doors for me. It's not me. It's her or me inside her, and it's unconscious. You're not planning it. It happens. She opens the door and something happens. She opens the door and someone comes in. This is how I write. I know that there are a million ways of writing. Some of it is planned. I want to take this person or this into such and such situation and see what happens. I want to get these two characters together and see what happens to them. This is what creates drama in fiction. The meeting of personalities, wills, impossible situations, and so on. But not all of it is planned. A lot of it comes naturally. The heroes, you have dialogues with your heroes. When at the time of writing, I'm actually sort of oblivious to the real world, and I have dialogues with my heroes. They are here on my mind all the time. I talk to George, I talk to Shushan, I talk to Luna, and they talk back to me. And this is how I write.
If I may, I had also, thank you very much, ma'am. I also had a question for Dr. Hartunian. I wanted to ask you, your thesis was so complex and much of it was new to me. I was wondering, have you put this out before? Is this available in the published literature? I found it a very complex and yet compelling thesis, and I wanted to know where I could read more of what you have written.
Thank you. Yes, I have published several articles in Armenian, Russian, as well as in English. So the issues which I shared here with you, I published in 2 articles in English. One published here at Armenian Genocide Museums, they have an international magazine, and the other one, there was a special issue on Armenian and Jewish connections, was published in Paris, review, something in French. Yes, I am publishing, and the third one about the rescue issue, I hope to publish during this year, maybe in Canada, I do not know. Thank you. Yes, you may find them also on Academia Edu.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all of them who made this important for us presentation, initiated this event, and we, especially new generation, as well, really appreciate the work done by you. So my first question is about joint action mechanisms. It concerns to our cooperations. As you all know, we share the same destiny, as you said, Ms. Aheimer. Actually, we were unable to control our destiny. So I am referring to our genocide of 1915 and your Holocaust, which took place from 1941 to 1945. In the aftermath of these prominent circumstances, our 2 nations, ancient Israel and Armenia, was scattered throughout the earth. Moreover, having the same faiths, we are also surrounded by so-called not accepting or not pleasant neighbors. Considering these facts as well, I think that there are sufficient grounds to represent our visions to each other of how we can endure these calamities, hardships, and challenges. So what vigorous, productive mechanisms could you offer for our communities to know each other better, to collaborate in social, political, cultural, economic, and military spheres? Don't you think that the main reason the Israel state didn't recognize Armenian genocide yet is the lack of communication, contact of our two nations? If we are to think about constructive policy, we have to motivate and encourage more communication in all spheres. For instance, enhance tourism, rate, organize commercial and cultural activities in both states, etc. And my second question relates. My second question actually is very short. Okay, thank you, Mr. Samuelian. My second question relates to military aspects. Please tell us, is it humane to sell weapons to a commonwealth, to a state that is very actively incorporated in war or is a conflicting part? And how would you feel, sorry for my question, if Armenia sold weapons to Deutschland in times of Holocaust? Thank you all. And thank you for your huge input in our fair demand, creating and maintaining history as it is. Thank you.
Such a long question, such complicated question, and it could be answered very briefly. Unfortunately, relations between states are dictated by politics and by interests, and not by moral issues. If moral issues ruled, there would be no question that Israel would recognize the Armenian genocide. And actually, it is an elite group in Israel, an important elite group, who fights consistently for it, my husband included. But this is the unfortunate of our modern world, or maybe not just modern world, where states behave according to interests, money, oil, weapons, and such. And when such considerations rule, we have situations like this. Do we like it? No, we protest against it. But reality is often stronger than we are. Intellectuals have pens and computers as weapons. This is what they can do. Write, protest, make a television story. This is what they can do. But the real decisions are taken by politicians who are usually very cynical beings, and their actions are dictated by different considerations.
Okay, one more question maybe? Is there something urgent?
We are all for it.
Okay. One more question, a comment? You have a comment?
You're from Atlanta.
Okay, very good. Is there anything else? Anyone else have anything they urgently want to say right now? Yes, urgently? No?
I just wanted to say I was wondering if the book would be translated in English so that
I really hope so. My first book was translated into English. It was not published yet, but it was my first book is also going to become a movie, an Israeli-American production. So let's hope.
There we go. Okay. As you can all see, this is a very interesting and important topic, and tomorrow we're going to spend all day talking about it. So please tell your colleagues and friends to come. It'll be in the Colloquium Gallery on the fourth floor, of this building. And we look forward to seeing you and others there tomorrow. And I'd like to thank our panelists once again for a very stimulating discussion. Thank you. There are some programs down here you'd like to get them. Thank you very much.
I'm interested in your paper.
Very nice. Really, thank you for organizing this, bringing everyone together.
Would you send it to me? Yes, I gave you my email.
Thank you very much for coming. Very much appreciated. I'll go over this now. Thank you very much.
Well, no. Imagination will just